I was standing at my mother's graveside when my husband texted me, "Don't come home." 20 minutes later, he sent a photo of my wedding dress on another woman. My name is Desiree, and I'm about to tell you how I lost my mother and my marriage on the same day, but discovered something about myself that changed everything. See, while my husband Colton was planning his grand betrayal, orchestrating what he thought would be my complete destruction, he'd forgotten one crucial detail. Every single thing he thought was his actually had my name on it. Let me back up for a second because you need to understand the players in this story. I'm 34 years old, and I built my digital marketing agency from nothing but a laptop and determination. My mother, Nadine, who we were burying that gray October morning, was the one who taught me everything about protecting myself financially. She was 62 when the cancer finally won, but she'd lived those years like a warrior queen, especially the last two. Colton, my husband of 5 years, was 36 and had the kind of charm that made you forget to ask important questions. When I met him 7 years ago, he was pitching a fitness app to investors at a tech conference where I was speaking about digital marketing strategies. The app never took off, but somehow he convinced me he was the one who would. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when the room was full of people he was trying to impress. Then there was Briella, 28 years old, with the kind of abs you only get from making fitness your entire personality. She was Colton's trainer at the CrossFit gym he'd started going to about a year ago. I'd met her at their gym's Christmas party 8 months back. She'd actually complimented my dress that night, said she loved vintage fashion and wondered where I'd found such a beautiful piece. Now I know she wasn't admiring my style. She was sizing me up for replacement. That morning started like every funeral morning does, with that hollow feeling in your chest where grief sits like a weight you can't shift no matter how you position yourself. The funeral home smelled like lilies and furniture polish, and my brother Vaughn had flown in from Seattle just to hold my hand through it. He kept asking where Colton was, why my husband wasn't there to support me through the worst day of my life. Food poisoning, I'd told him, repeating the excuse Colton had groaned from our bed that morning. He'd been so convincing, clutching his stomach, running to the bathroom every few minutes. I'd even brought him water and crackers before I left, kissed his forehead, told him I understood. "Your mom would understand," he'd said. And I'd believed him because, why wouldn't I? Who lies about something like that on the day you're burying your mother? My father Ronan gave the eulogy, his voice breaking when he talked about their 40 years together. My sister Shiloh sang Amazing Grace because it was Mom's favorite, even though none of us were particularly religious. Even my teenage nephew Jet stood up and read a poem he'd written about his grandmother, how she'd taught him to play poker and never let him win just to make him feel better. Grandma said, "Earning something real is always better than being handed something fake," he read, and everyone nodded because that was Nadine through and through. The cemetery was on a hill overlooking the city, the kind of place where you could see for miles on a clear day. But that day was overcast, the clouds hanging low like they were mourning with us. We each had roses to lay on the casket, yellow ones because Mom always said red roses were cliché. "If you're going to do something," she used to say, "do it with your own style, not everyone else's." I was placing my rose, whispering my final goodbye, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it because what could possibly be more important than this moment? But it buzzed again and again, insistent like a wasp that won't leave you alone. My Aunt Cecilia noticed my distraction, touched my arm gently. The third buzz made me pull out my phone, and that's when I saw the message that would change everything. "Don't come home." Then came the photo that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. There was Briella, standing in my bedroom wearing my wedding dress, the one I'd carefully preserved for the daughter I might have someday. She was smiling at the camera like she'd won a prize, and behind her I could see my things in boxes, packed and stacked like I was already gone from my own life. The morning of my mother's funeral started at 4:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I'd had with her in those final weeks. She'd been so insistent about certain things, almost urgent in a way that made sense now that she was gone. "Desiree, promise me you'll always keep your assets separate," she'd said during one of our last lucid conversations at the hospice. Her hand, thin and bruised from all the IV lines, had gripped mine with surprising strength. "I know you love Colton, but love and financial security are two different things." I'd laughed it off then, told her she was worrying about nothing. Colton and I were solid. We'd been married 5 years, together for 7. Sure, we'd had our rough patches, especially when his fitness app failed and he'd spent 6 months depressed on our couch, but we'd worked through it. I'd supported him, both emotionally and financially, because that's what marriages were about. My digital marketing agency, Nexus Creative, had been my baby before Colton came along. I'd started it in my studio apartment with just my laptop and a desperate need to prove I could make it on my own. By the time I met Colton, I was managing 12 major clients and had 3 employees. Now, 7 years later, I had 22 employees and an office downtown that overlooked the river. Colton had seemed so impressed by my success when we first met. "You're incredible," he'd said on our 3rd date after I'd told him about landing a $1 million client. "Most women would be intimidated dating a guy who's still figuring things out, but you just see potential in everyone." Looking back, I should have heard what he was really saying. He wasn't complimenting my vision. He was testing to see if I'd be willing to carry him. The morning of the funeral, Colton's performance was Oscar-worthy. He'd started groaning around 3 a.m., stumbling to the bathroom, making sure I heard every retch and moan. When I'd offered to stay home with him, he'd pushed me away. "No, baby. Your mom needs this. She needs you to be there. I'll be fine." I'd made him toast, left water and medication on his nightstand, even set up his laptop so he could watch Netflix from bed. "I love you," I'd said before leaving, and he'd mumbled it back, face half buried in the pillow. My brother Vaughn had picked me up at 8 a.m. sharp. He'd taken one look at me and pulled me into a hug that lasted a full minute. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, studying my face. "Colton's sick and Mom's dead," I replied. "Sleep feels pretty irrelevant right now." Vaughn had never liked Colton, though he'd been polite about it for my sake. "Convenient timing for food poisoning," he'd muttered as we drove to the funeral home, but I'd defended my husband like I always did. "He's devastated he can't be there," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if they were true. Colton had been distant since Mom got sick, always finding reasons to skip hospital visits, always busy when I needed to talk about her declining health. The funeral home was packed. Mom had been a force in our community, serving on 3 nonprofit boards and running a book club that was really more of a wine and wisdom gathering for women over 50. Her friend Margaret grabbed me as soon as I walked in. "Your mother was so proud of you," she said, tears streaming down her powdered cheeks. "She talked about you constantly, about how smart you were to keep your business in your own name, how you'd learned from her mistakes with her first marriage." I'd never known much about Mom's first marriage, the one before Dad. She'd mentioned it maybe twice in my whole life, both times as a cautionary tale about financial dependence. My father, Ronan, stood at the casket, his shoulders shaking. They'd been married 40 years, weathered everything together. When I reached him, he turned and cupped my face in his hands. "She loved you so much, Des. You were her greatest accomplishment." My sister Shiloh arrived with her husband and my nephew Jet. She looked exhausted. She'd been sleeping at the hospice for the last week, refusing to leave Mom's side. "Did Colton come?" she asked, scanning the room. "Food poisoning," I said, and she raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Shiloh had a way of saying everything with just a look, a skill she'd inherited from Mom. The service was beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Every hymn, every prayer, every memory shared felt like another goodbye I wasn't ready to say. Mom had planned most of it herself, down to the psalm she wanted read and the flowers on the altar. She'd faced death the same way she'd faced life, completely in control. The first text arrived at the worst possible moment. The funeral director had just handed me the rope to lower my mother's casket, and my phone vibrated against my hip like an angry insect. I ignored it, focusing on the smooth rope in my hands, the weight of the casket, the finality of this moment. My mother deserved my complete attention as we lowered her into the ground. "We need to talk," the message said when I finally looked at it during the reception. Just 4 words, but something about them made my stomach tighten. Colton never said we needed to talk. He just talked, usually at length, about whatever was bothering him. The reception was held in the church hall, a beige space that smelled like coffee and old carpet. People kept approaching me with casserole dishes and condolences, and I accepted both with the same numb gratitude. My Aunt Cecilia had just handed me a plate of food I couldn't imagine eating when the second text came through. "Don't come home yet." I stared at those 4 words while Cecilia talked about how beautiful the service was. Don't come home? To my own house? The house I'd bought with my own money 3 years before I even met him? "Desiree, honey, are you all right?" Cecilia asked, noticing my face. "I'm fine," I lied, slipping my phone back into my pocket. "Just overwhelmed." But I wasn't fine. Something was wrong. Colton's food poisoning had miraculously improved enough for him to send cryptic messages. I excused myself and stepped outside, where the October air bit at my skin through my black dress. The third text was just an address. "Marriott Downtown, room 412. Come here instead." My hands started shaking. Why would my husband want me to come to a hotel instead of our home after my mother's funeral? What possible explanation could make this make sense? Then the photo arrived and everything inside me went cold. It was Briella, standing in my bedroom wearing my wedding dress. My preserved, professionally cleaned, stored in a special box wedding dress. She was smiling at the camera, one hand on her hip like she was posing for a bridal magazine. Behind her, I could see boxes stacked against the wall, my belongings packed up like I was already gone. The caption made me want to throw my phone across the parking lot. "Thanks for keeping it in such good condition. Fits perfectly." I must have made a sound because suddenly Vaughn was beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "Des, what's wrong?" I handed him my phone, unable to speak, watched his face transform from concern to confusion to rage as he processed what he was seeing. "Is this your bedroom? Is that your wedding dress?" His voice got louder with each question. "Is Colton seriously doing this today?" Before I could answer, another text arrived, this one from Colton himself. "I've packed your things. They're outside. Briella and I have been together for 8 months. The divorce papers are on the kitchen counter. Just sign them and we can make this clean. No drama, no lawyers, just a fresh start for everyone." 8 months. I did the math while standing in that church parking lot, my mother's funeral reception continuing inside without me. 8 months ago was February, 2 months after Mom's diagnosis. While I was Googling treatment options and driving her to oncology appointments, he was starting an affair with his CrossFit trainer. "I'm going to kill him," Vaughn said, already heading for his car. "I'm going to drive over there right now and—" "No," I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. "Let me see my phone." I scrolled through the messages again, then pulled up our shared bank account. Still there, untouched. He couldn't access it without my authorization, something he'd complained about but I'd never changed. Then I checked the mortgage documents I kept digitally filed. The house was in my name only, purchased before our marriage with my money, never refinanced, never amended. His car? Leased through my company as a business vehicle for tax purposes? His new personal training studio that he was so proud of? Registered under my LLC because his credit was too bad to get a business loan. "Desiree," Vaughn said, watching my face, "what are you thinking?" My father Ronan came outside then, followed by Shiloh. "People are asking where you went," he started, then saw our faces. "What's happened?" I showed them the texts, the photo, watched my father's face turn red, then purple. Shiloh grabbed the phone and read everything twice, like she was hoping she'd misunderstood the first time. "He's evicting you from your own house during Mom's funeral," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "And he's been cheating for 8 months." "Apparently so," I said, and started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because the audacity of it all was so absurd I couldn't process it any other way. Here I was, grieving my mother, and my husband had chosen this exact moment to blow up my life. Except he'd made one crucial error in his planning. He'd forgotten that everything he thought was ours was actually mine. The 20-minute drive from the church to my house changed everything. Shiloh drove while I sat in the passenger seat, my mind shifting from shock to something sharper, clearer. It was like my mother's voice was right there in the car with us, repeating all those lessons she'd drilled into me over the years. "Never put a man's name on something you paid for," she'd said when I bought the house. Love doesn't require co-ownership. I pulled out my phone and started making a mental inventory. The house was mine, purchased 3 years before I met Colton with the down payment I'd saved from my first big client contract. I'd never added his name to the deed, despite his hints and occasional complaints about feeling like a guest in his own home. "Pull over," I told Shiloh suddenly. "I need to make some calls." She pulled into a gas station parking lot, and I stepped out into the crisp October air. My first call was to Wesley Carver, my lawyer and friend from college. He'd handled my business incorporation and every contract since. "Wes, I need you to meet me at my house in exactly 1 hour. Bring a locksmith and call the non-emergency police line. I want officers there as witnesses." "Desiree, what's going on? Are you safe?" "I'm fine, but my husband is trying to illegally evict me from my own property while I'm at my mother's funeral. He's moved another woman into my house and put my belongings on the lawn." There was a pause. Then Wesley's voice turned professional. "I'll be there with everything we need. Don't go inside until I arrive." My next call was to Indy, my executive assistant who'd been with me for 4 years. She answered on the first ring, even though it was Saturday. "Indy, I need you to log into the company accounts right now. Freeze all credit cards in Colton's name. Change every password he might have access to. Remove his authorization from any accounts." "On it." "Should I be worried?" "No, just thorough. Check the business vehicle lease for his car and email me a copy. Also, send me the LLC documentation for his training studio." "The one you financed?" "Sending now." My third call was to my bank. I verified that Colton had no access to my personal accounts, then put a freeze on any attempts to add new authorized users without my physical presence and multiple forms of ID. By the time I got back in the car, I'd also called my home security company and requested they save all footage from the last 24 hours. If Colton had moved Briella into my house, I wanted documentation of exactly when and how. "You're scary calm right now," Vaughn said from the back seat. He'd insisted on coming along, leaving his rental car at the church. "I'm thinking like Mom," I replied. "Remember what she always said? Never make decisions from emotion when money is involved." My phone buzzed with emails from Indy. Everything was exactly as I remembered. Colton's name wasn't on anything that mattered. He was an authorized user on company credit cards I could cancel. He drove a car leased by my company. His business operated under my LLC because he couldn't qualify for his own loan after defaulting on credit cards in his 20s. "He really thought he could just take everything?" Shiloh asked, merging back onto the main road. "He thought being married meant automatic ownership," I said. "He never paid attention to the paperwork, always said legal stuff was boring, that he trusted me to handle it." Another text from Colton arrived. "I know this is hard, but it's for the best. We haven't been happy for a while. Just come to the hotel and we can talk about this like adults." I almost laughed. We hadn't been happy? I'd been stressed because my mother was dying, and instead of supporting me, he'd been sleeping with his trainer. And now he wanted to talk like adults after putting my belongings on the lawn like trash? "Don't respond," Vaughn advised, reading over my shoulder. "Let him think he's in control." He was right. Let Colton believe his plan was working. Let him think I was devastated, defeated, heading to that hotel room to beg for answers. He had no idea that every document that mattered was digital, backed up in clouds he didn't even know existed. He had no idea that the successful businessman persona he'd been projecting to Briella was built entirely on my foundation. 20 minutes until Wesley arrives," I said, checking the time. "Let's see what kind of mess my husband has made." As we drove through my neighborhood, I felt something shift inside me. The grief for my mother was still there, heavy and real, but alongside it was something else. Determination, maybe, or just the simple clarity that comes when someone shows you exactly who they are. Colton had chosen the day of my mother's funeral to betray me. That decision told me everything I needed to know about the man I'd married. But more importantly, it freed me from any guilt about what I was about to do next. When we pulled up to my house, the scene was exactly as advertised. My belongings were scattered across the front lawn like a garage sale nobody wanted. Clothes spilled from boxes, my grandmother's china set was stacked carelessly on the grass, and photo albums lay open, their pages fluttering in the October wind. 3 of my neighbors stood on their porches, watching the spectacle with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for car accidents. Colton emerged from the front door the moment our car stopped, Briella trailing behind him. She was still wearing my wedding dress, though it looked less triumphant now and more like evidence at a crime scene. The dress was too long for her. She had to hold it up to walk, and I noticed she'd already gotten grass stains on the hem. "Des, don't make this harder than it needs to be," Colton started, walking toward me with his hands up like he was approaching a wild animal. I looked at Briella, who had the decency to appear uncomfortable. "The dress looks beautiful on you," I said, my voice carrying across the yard. "Keep it. Consider it a parting gift." Colton's confidence grew at my apparent surrender. That smirk I'd once found charming spread across his face. "See? I told you she'd be reasonable. We can handle this like adults." "Oh, I'm very reasonable," I said, as Wesley's BMW pulled up behind us, followed immediately by a police cruiser. "Which is why I'm reasonably asking you both to leave my property before you're arrested for trespassing." The smirk faltered. "Your property? We're married, Des. This is community property. My lawyer said—" "Your lawyer is wrong," Wesley interrupted, approaching with 2 police officers. "Illinois isn't a community property state, and this house was purchased before marriage with Desiree's separate funds. She never added your name to the deed." He held up his tablet, showing the property records. "You have no legal right to be here, much less to remove her belongings or change the locks." Colton's face went from confident to confused. "But I've been living here for 5 years. I get mail here. That makes you a tenant at best," Wesley continued. "And even tenants can't evict the property owner. Officers, this man has illegally evicted my client, changed her locks, and moved an unauthorized person into her home." Officer Thorne, whom I recognized from community fundraisers, stepped forward. "Sir, we're going to need you to let Mrs. Morrison back into her house immediately." "The studio," Colton said desperately, his voice rising. "I own a business. The training studio, that's mine." "The studio registered under my LLC?" I asked, pulling up the documents on my phone. "The one where you're listed as an employee? The one whose lease I personally guarantee and pay for?" Briella had gone pale under her spray tan. "Colton, you said the house was yours. You said the business was yours. You said you were leaving her with nothing because she was nothing without you." "I built that business," Colton sputtered, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. "You built it with my money, under my business license, in a space I lease," I corrected. "I have every receipt, every document, every bank transfer, including the ones where you've been withdrawing cash from the business account to pay for Briella's apartment for the last 8 months. My forensic accountant calls that embezzlement." "Forensic accountant?" His voice cracked. "Did you think I wouldn't notice $47,000 disappearing? I've been documenting everything for months, waiting to see how far you'd go. I was going to confront you after Mom's funeral, maybe try counseling, but you saved me the trouble." The locksmith Wesley had brought was already working on the door. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, and I could hear someone recording on their phone. Colton looked around wildly, realizing his grand gesture had become a public humiliation. "The cars," he tried one last time. "My BMW, leased under my company as a business vehicle. The lease agreement is in my name. You're listed as an authorized driver, which I'm revoking as of today." Officer Thorne turned to Colton. "Sir, I'm going to need you to start gathering your personal belongings, and only your personal belongings. If there's any dispute about ownership, leave the item here." Briella started crying, mascara running down her cheeks onto my wedding dress. "This isn't what you told me. You said she was crazy, that she was abusive, that you owned everything and she was trying to take it from you." "I'm none of those things," I said calmly. "I'm just a woman who buried her mother this morning and came home to find her husband had given away her wedding dress. But don't worry, Briella, you can keep it. Every time you look at it, you can remember the day you helped a man try to steal from his wife while she was at her mother's funeral." The locksmith finished, handing me new keys. I walked past Colton and Briella, past the boxes of my life scattered on the lawn, and into my house, where everything would be different now, but at least it would be mine. It took Colton exactly 43 minutes to pack his actual possessions. I watched from my living room window as he filled 2 suitcases and 3 boxes. 7 years together, and that's all he really owned in our house. His gaming console, some clothes, a watch collection he'd inherited from his grandfather, and ironically, the engagement ring box I'd never seen him open since our wedding day. Briella left first, struggling to walk in my wedding dress across the lawn she'd helped destroy. She stopped at her car, a pink Mini Cooper that I now suspected my money had helped purchase, and looked back at the house. Our eyes met through the window, and she mouthed something that might have been, "I'm sorry," before driving away. She'd learned her lesson the hard way, just like I had. Vaughn and Shiloh helped me bring everything back inside. My father, Ronan, insisted on changing the locks himself, even though the locksmith had already done it. "I need to do something," he said, his toolbox in hand. "I need to fix something today." I understood. We all dealt with grief and rage in our own ways. By evening, my house looked almost normal again, except for the empty spaces where Colton's things had been. The gap in the closet where his clothes hung, the missing coffee mug with the stupid motivational quote, the silence where his video games used to blast through the speakers. 3 weeks later, I sat in Wesley's office signing papers. Not divorce papers, since Colton would have to file those himself and pay for his own lawyer. These were prosecution papers. The forensic accountant had found more than just the $47,000 in embezzlement. There were forged signatures on loan applications, credit cards opened in my company's name that I'd never authorized, and a secret bank account where he'd been storing cash, skimmed from the business. "He's looking at 5 to 7 years if convicted," Wesley said, organizing the documents. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is very interested in this case." "You know what the ironic part is?" I told him, signing my name for the 10th time. If he'd just asked for a divorce like an adult, I probably would have given him half of everything, even though legally I didn't have to. I loved him. I would have wanted him to be okay. But trying to steal it all while I was burying my mother, that's a choice he's going to live with in a federal cell. 6 months later, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Briella. "He's doing the same thing to me now. Says his new apartment is in his name, but I'm paying for it. You were right to walk away. I'm sorry for my part in what happened." I didn't respond. Some lessons you have to learn yourself, and she was learning hers. According to mutual acquaintances, Colton had convinced her to put his car in her name since his assets were frozen. She was also paying for his lawyer, believing his promises that he'd pay her back once he won the case against me. There was no case to win, just criminal charges to face. My mother was right, as always. Love with your heart, but think with your head. Keep your assets separate. Document everything, and never ever let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting what you've earned. The house feels different now, but it's a good different. Lighter somehow, like opening windows after a long winter. I converted Colton's man cave into an office and hung my mother's portrait, where his sports memorabilia used to be. Her eyes seemed to follow me, approving, protective, proud. Every morning I have coffee in the kitchen he tried to steal from me, and I think about how the worst day of my life also freed me from a marriage that was slowly draining everything I'd built. My mother's death taught me about real loss. Colton's betrayal taught me about fake love. Together, they taught me that the only person responsible for protecting your life is you. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are, completely and without pretense. Colton did that perfectly on the day of my mother's funeral. He just didn't realize the house he was standing in, the car he was driving, the business he was claiming, and the life he was living had never been his to take. My name is Desiree, and this was my story of loss, betrayal, and ultimately liberation. If you found value in hearing it, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they know. Comment below with your own stories of overcoming betrayal or protecting what's yours. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories from real people who refuse to be victims of their circumstances. Remember, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything that was already yours.